Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Karen Nardotza. I'm the President and CEO of Moxie Marketing.
They're just the same.
And we are presenting today along with Beth Adon, our Marketing Director, and Hal Collins, our Web Developer. Moxie is an agency, marketing agency that specializes only in the fresh produce world, and we are full service. We do an awful lot of web design. It's probably one of the top services that we provide on a regular ongoing basis. And we've designed and programmed, oh gosh, I've lost count of how many sites we've done over the years. And it's a topic that we're passionate about educating people about, because websites, there are so many resources out there in the world who can do web development, which is a fantastic thing. So for brands who need to maintain their site, update their site, or develop a brand new website, the resources available to do that are abundant. The difficult part of that is sussing out which resources are qualified and which aren't can be daunting, even for us. Sometimes we rely on subcontractors and freelancers when we're over capacity, and making sure that someone knows what they're doing, especially on the programming end of things, can be, it's very technical. And so we've come up with a process at Moxie to do website planning and development that helps our clients with very successful website launches. And we're really not here to pitch you on that today. What we're hoping to do is to give everybody an overview of the process and what to look out for, so that regardless of who you choose as your resource to help with web development, that you feel better informed and more confident about what's important to look out for and what's important to avoid. So without further ado, Beth, we can get into it at any time.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And as we're going through these slides, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the little chat bubble, and we will get to those either during the presentation or right afterward. And what we're going to do is go through all of these slides, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A, and then we're going to launch a poll question and move into a breakout room so that we can have some of these discussions in smaller groups. So I'll go ahead and get started. So why do we need to have a well-designed website? In addition to having a pretty website, you should really think about its functionality and how it works on the back end. So instead of just thinking of your website as sort of a digital billboard that people go to as a first point of contact when they're searching for you, we really need to think about it as a holistic way that your business operates and manages. So it enables not only your marketing messaging and efficient brand communications, but you can also use it to create targeted lead generation through landing pages. You can collect your customers' information. You can manage your employees and transactions that they're doing. You can provide supply chain transparency with your B2B partners. And most importantly, your website is linked to a whole host of very important business critical operations, oftentimes your email or your point of sale system. And so it's crucial to know that if your website goes down or has a broken piece or an unupdated plugin, that your email or your point of sale can go down. So it's super important to make sure that it's always up to date and programmed properly. So in order to make the most of your company's virtual headquarters, which is what we're calling it, we need to talk about process and the steps for designing. And design is not just, what it looks like. We're talking about design in terms of actual programming elements. So we're going to go through a step-by-step process to help you figure out what those should be.
A lot of what we'll be talking about too will be coming at web development from the perspective of relying on a CMS system, a content management system. A majority of the websites that are built on the WordPress platform. We also do straight HTML programming and programming in other languages, but there's a reason that WordPress is the most popular CMS system on the planet right now. And so if anyone has questions specifically about WordPress or any other CMS, please feel free to jump in during any point during the discussion.
Yeah, and just so you're aware, WordPress is about 40% and growing of all the websites online, which are billions. So it's not something that we want to talk in great depth about, but just be aware of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a whole host of different options for programming your website. We are talking specifically about WordPress because it's one of the easiest to manage, and you can use both a visual editor and a code editor. So if you're updating and you don't know code, you can still make some changes, although we do recommend having a web developer that is able to speak HTML and CSS. The next step here, I guess the first step would be to go through the sales process and have budget discussions. Karen, would you like to talk a little bit about how we go about doing that?
Sure. I mean, when we help our clients determine a budget for their website project, we consider whether they're going to be hosting themselves or hosting through a service like GoDaddy or Network Solutions, and determining that is a great place to start. Also, what type of functionality will be necessary to keep the site fully operational and functional. And from there, we, building out the technical requirements, we talk about who's going to be maintaining the site. For us, maintenance means something different than updates. For us, maintenance means keeping the core software up to date, making sure that the core software, WordPress, and the plugins are in sync, making sure that the hosting environment is optimized to keep the website running properly. So all of those types of considerations will go into determining the budget, as well as content generation. And content generation is probably the area that is most challenging in web development. Most of our clients don't realize how time consuming it can be to write the copy, gather photography or take photography, have videos professionally taken or shot themselves, and gathering all of that information and making sure that it's ready to go. We like to have a majority of that content gathered before the design process begins so that our graphic designers know what they're designing for. It's always possible to Greek the copy, put in fake copy and choose stock photography, but the design of a website will all be significantly different using stock photography versus actual custom photos. I mean, for a lot of our grower shipper clients and our farming clients, photos of their own groves and photos of their own plants and operational facilities are so much better than anything you'd ever find in stock photography. But a lot of our clients also don't think ahead to have those photos and those videos taken in advance. And if you're growing a seasonal product, you might need to wait a year until the season comes around again for you to have great photos of the orchards or something like that, especially if you're not growing row crops or manufacturing like salad in a plant. So those types of budgeting considerations are important. And we actually have a checklist that maybe we could share with people later about how to go about planning a website redevelopment project, because the coding requirements are just part of it, and finding an expert web developer are only part of it. The content generation is probably the most important piece.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that, Hal?
Sure. And I, a lot of what we talk about in budgeting is not, how high or how low or, what's the best deal. We talk a lot about, what are your goals and what are your objectives, and are you going to do e-commerce? Or are you going to, there's part of that discussion that needs to happen before budgets can actually come alive.
Yeah, and in terms of web copy, there's all kinds of considerations that need to take place. It's not just, what's your company's story and history. We want to make sure that that's marketing messaging that's targeted towards your audience and will be compelling toward them to make a sale or convert. So that's something to consider too, is it's not just any type of copy, and it can't be any type of length. It has to be, a certain length, over 250 words per page for Google to properly index it. There's all kinds of considerations to go into that too.
If I had $1 for every time a client who wanted to develop their own copy told us later after the project was finished, if they'd realized how time consuming it was going to be, and how hard it was, that they would have had us do it in the first place, I might be able to retire at this point. So it's always frustrating to hear someone say that at the back end, because we could have helped. But that's definitely one area where when you're developing a website, it's possible to generate your own content, but it could be really time consuming and challenging. a lot of the times we end up providing editing advice anyhow. As Beth was saying, there are certain requirements that make the website more searchable for Google and optimize search engine optimization and whatnot. So content development is definitely something that should be worked into the budget as well as the timeline. I would give yourself a couple of months for that at minimum.
And budgets can vary so wildly too, just based on, your size of business and your goals. So it's hard to say an exact number of, what that range should be. All right, so after budget has been discussed, then we get into discovery. So before even starting to design or choosing stock photos, we want to figure out, what is the history of your business and what is its background? Why is that important? Where does it sit within the market? Where does it sit next to your competitors? We want to talk about your brand's tone and image. Certain colors and styles of writing will do better towards certain tones than others. Consider the types of website visitors that you're looking to collect and what you want them to do once they land on your page. Is your website for your clients or to generate leads? Are you communicating with your employees or trying to hire? Or are you doing management and relationships with your vendors? And then once you determine who you want on your website, what do you want them to do once they get there? You want them to make a sale, contact you, etc. You also want to think about how, yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
We want to think about how the brand is positioned in the marketplace. So that's not just, where do you stack up next to your competitors in a Google search? It's how do you see your brand being used by your consumers? Is it a luxury brand? Would you say that you're a value brand? Is it for everyday use or is it in a specialty category?
We love getting examples of websites that you and your team like and don't like. And the more input we have on what your likes and dislikes are, the better. A great web developer will tell you that what is possible and what isn't, and explain why some of your likes and dislikes may be valid or invalid, or something to avoid versus something to really go for. But it certainly is very helpful for us to understand what you like and don't like in a site, whether that's the functionality or the look and feel, whether something is full screen or whether there's a frame around it. All of those visuals are very helpful when trying to determine what a website is going to look like. The other thing to consider is if you've got an existing site, explaining to your web developer why a redesign is important right now. Like, what is it that's driving the website redesign as an initiative at all? Is there any functionality that's missing that you wish you had? Is it operating poorly? Have you been contacted by an attorney who is saying that your website isn't ADA compliant and you need to redesign the site to bring it into compliance? As much information as your web developer can understand about why a redesign is something that you're pursuing would be helpful to know going into this discovery process.
And if you have existing website with analytics, so we can look at the data, where are they going? What are they doing? What's most hit upon? A lot of people say, oh, they watch a lot of videos. Well, do they really? It gives you some real insight into what your visitors are doing and why they're doing it.
That's a good point. We like to analyze the analytics before we go into a website redesign. That helps us determine the information hierarchy and the sitemap for the architecture and the user experience build out.
Yeah, and data is also a really good reason why you should have a site at all. Often businesses will rely on having a Facebook page or a social media handle. And that's very valid to have those pages because the consumers are usually going to them first before they'll go to the website searches. But you don't own your data if you have your Instagram page or your Facebook page. Facebook owns all of that information and knows who your customers are. They know how you're interacting with them. Whereas if you pull that information onto your website, you own all of that data. You're able to look at analytics, you're able to see which pages they're going to the most and how long they're spending there. So that's a pretty compelling reason why you want to make sure that that site belongs to you. All right, so after discovery, we can talk timeline. So Karen mentioned in the beginning that website projects can take several months. We find that they can often take 3 to 8 months or even longer. Often the longer is usually because of client delays or photography delays or issues with copywriting and editing. So that is probably why it would be longer, but 3 to 8 months is a pretty reliable timeline for a website design. The
3 months
milestone.
would be quick. 3 months, we would expect that a majority of the content was already developed. If content needs to be developed, 3 months is almost a no way.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about milestones?
Sure,
Well,
I mean, the way we, oh, Hal, go ahead.
Well, milestones are going to be, like you were just talking about, Beth, where we have, it's going to be broken down into sections. We're going to have content, the discovery is going to be first, then the content's going to start being gathered and developed. Your design is going to follow after that. And, development is kind of at the end of all that, almost in the exact, way Beth has it written out here is kind of, this is the line we follow as far as the milestones are concerned. And those aren't set in stone because they become kind of fluid and some of them actually overlap each other. Like as soon as a design is kind of agreed upon in a certain way, even though we don't have every part of the design, development can actually start. So we just want to make sure that, when we're talking to clients, we develop a timeline and we develop the milestones, and we all agree to that before the project begins.
Right. And part of in the key milestones that we've got listed here on the screen, content development also includes navigation development. And as Hal was saying, in terms of this being somewhat fluid and flexible, we've often designed the sitemap, so showing which, from the home page, which are the sub pages and the tertiary pages and how all of those pages interact with each other. Doing that on the front end is a great way to get the overall scope of how large you think the site will be, how many sections there will be, how many landing pages are needed. But to do that first and then get into writing the content, be prepared for whatever navigation and sitemap decisions you've made, be willing to let that change. Because sometimes when the copywriting has begun and we start to see photo choices, when we get into the graphic design phase, that navigation that's been predetermined doesn't make sense anymore. The copy doesn't flow the way you thought it would. And you realize that, a section that you had under, sustainability, under your sustainability landing page maybe belongs under farming or another section instead. So it's pretty common for us to do the navigation sitemap, then start content development, and then begin moving things around. We do like to have everything moved around in sort of in an outline format before the graphic design starts. But then once the graphic design starts and you start to see it laid out in a visual format, you realize, okay, that sounded good on paper, but now that we see it in the design, that would really go better elsewhere also. Some of that might be our perfectionist tendencies, but hopefully our clients appreciate that level of detail and making sure that the end result is as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, and in terms of site navigation and menu items, about like 8 to 10, maybe, even 5 to 8 would be a sweet spot for how many tabs you should have on your website. You should include for sure like a home page, an about page, something about your services or your farms. Maybe an Our Story page could be combined with about, contact, like news, blog, and media. So those are kind of general, most common site navigation headers.
Right. Where you want to make sure that you're not making very many changes is after once the navigation's been set, the content has been written and created, and the design has been approved. Once programming begins, you don't want to make any more changes at that point, because once programming has started, if changes are made after that, that means reprogramming and starting over, and that can get expensive.
All right, so after timeline, we can get to the style and design, which a lot of people feel is the fun part. The exciting part is what it's going to look like. So before you even begin to design, you should consider what options and assets you have available, because you don't want to have to be scrambling for little pieces to put together during this process. So we recommend having a style guide for your business that would include fonts and logos and colors, when to use each, and how to speak about the business in certain scenarios. High resolution graphics and logos. You want to make sure that your logos are available in both color format and in a black and white format so that you can place it on top of other pages. As we mentioned, we want to have, example websites, things you like or dislike. And Pinterest is a really good tool and resource for inspiration for design. You can just start Pinteresting away like websites that you love and then creating a board. And that's really helpful to share with your designers so they can get a visual look and feel for what is in your head that they want to turn into creation. And then consider if you have content available or if you need help creating the content. And we don't mean, do you have all the blog posts in the world that you want to publish already pre-written? We mean, do you have content available for those main pages that we want to have in the navigation header?
Right. So Hal, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask a question for a second, because oftentimes when we're developing a website for a new brand or for a refreshed brand, a style guide doesn't exist, and we can actually create a style guide, from create a new logo, create all the materials, the sales materials that go along with that, create the website, and at the end of the creation of all of those items, a style guide somewhat naturally comes together. Sometimes there's font issues, there's web safe fonts and there's fonts that are not web safe, but how do we get around that? What should people know from the programming end about font selection on the web?
Well, font selection is I would always recommend that, we stick to a font that is easy to read, legible, the right size, and, as far as spacing and kerning and, line height and so on and so forth. CSS is very adjustable, but it's good to have that style guide for me as a developer, because that way I can set up things up front that are what I call global. They'll be website wide, and pulling in fonts is a little difficult because it actually decreases your speed and performance because your fonts have to load each time. And especially if you don't have the font on your computer. If you go with a very stylized font or something that's kind of not normal for the web, then you end up having to download that font every time a new visitor comes to the website. So it's a little bit different, but I don't want to discourage people from, having what they feel like their brand represents.
You said CSS. I know that means cascading style sheets, but the rest of our viewers don't know what CSS or cascading style sheets are and what they do. So what do they do?
CSS, cascading style sheets, are what drives the design of the website. Where we used to have to program everything into the HTML, what we call inline CSS, now is, where you're basically having a style sheet for every part of your website, if you will. It can show how you can have a print style sheet that will set up a certain way that the pages are printed, or it can, just drive design throughout the whole site. It can be very specific to one thing on the website, but it's basically the design driver behind the whole website.
It sets the design standard for the site.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it can be hundreds of lines. It can be thousands of lines. I mean, it's truly, it can get very complicated and detailed.
Yeah, and that's a scenario where you don't want to go poking around in code if you don't know what you're doing. So definitely recommend having a web developer that knows how to speak and create in that language. All right. So in terms of content, which I know we've been mentioning a lot about having to create that before we begin designing, some of the options for creating content, just to give that a little bit of context and perspective, is it can be as simple as, what's growing in your field right now, some updates from your farms, what's in season, what's happening at your packaging or production plants, maybe what you're cooking, maybe designing some recipes surrounding your products. Providing interactive maps of your growing regions across the world or across the United States is always really exciting for visitors to see and very helpful for your B2B partners. Also providing seasonal updates. If there's any sort of inclement weather or delays, we want to make sure that your website is able to communicate that.
Part of what, and so under the umbrella of avoiding pitfalls, I'll mention that it's so fantastic that at this point, today you can shoot video on your phone and shoot photos on your phone. And so you can go out into the field and catch your harvesting crews packing, the cilantro that's gonna, be boxed up and shipped out today, or show your crews, packing watermelons right there in the field, or show what's going on in the plant. And that is fantastic, as long as whoever is shooting those videos and whoever's posting them, whether on the website or on your social media, is well informed about food safety standards and other standards that your retailers and other target audiences might be cluing into. This has been especially important during COVID. We often monitor our clients' social media and website content as a service that they expect us to do. To be looking out for, if you've got multiple contributors throughout, it's not just your marketing person, your one marketing person, but you've got your agronomist or other harvesting people who are helping you take photos. They don't always realize that what they're posting or what they're providing to be posted may not reflect positively on your brand or your company. So someone does need to be looking out for, is everybody wearing gloves and hairnets? In the age of COVID, even if gloves or hairnets aren't required, would it be a best practice to show harvest happening that way anyhow for the optics of it? So remembering that your website is a brand communications tool, and to keep all of those considerations in mind as you're posting content updates is important. Put somebody in there as the police to monitor that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Is social media allows a wide open window directly into your business as long as you're posting. So always, in any case, keep an eye on what you're posting, who's posting it. In addition to, safety considerations, we always want to make sure that messaging is on brand. We want to make sure that the correct people are named and things like that.
What do we want to say or advise on when you're posting content in terms of file size? We've had clients who have taken over updating their website with content and have uploaded photos that are, 2 and 3 megabytes each, or videos that are many times larger than that. How could that have been avoided, either through the programming of the site or through training?
Exactly. And there are things, if it's a WordPress site, there are tools and plugins that we can put in place if the client, does want to do updates, and as far as videos and things like that, that can actually squeeze the size down. But that's always good to discuss that kind of thing in the process, in the discovery and building timelines and et cetera.
Well, that's something that can slow a website way down.
Way down.
Yeah. And that kind of thing, like image size requirements, you can place that in your style guide so that anyone who's updating your website or adding content can just easily go to that document and then see what are the requirements. Can I resize this in Photoshop to make sure that the site is loading quickly? All right, so let's get into nuts and bolts of programming. So Hal, do you want to take this slide?
Sure. A lot of things that we talk about along the way, hopefully will get us to this point, but it's always good to have kind of that checklist, because multi-language translation type stuff and anything that would basically be caught up front, hopefully. But just to know up front that search engine optimization for your business And that's a tricky subject. The three of us had a quite lengthy discussion about that, because it's not that you're really trying to hit the top of Google for people searching for broccoli or asparagus or, Vidalia onions. It's really more about having your website easily searchable and easily done, because of different things that are coming out, voice search and things that are taking hold more and more in the marketplace. So it's really more about, Google just loving your website, not so much that you're going to always end up at the top of the lead, but that people can find you when they need to. How much new content will you add? Will you add it, or will we add it, or another, agency add it? It's all things to be discussed. And do you need training? Do you want to know how your website works, and how long is that going to take, and who is that? Who's that person that's going to do it, or a team that's going to do it? And a user's manual is kind of something that we would require to know up front, because we could kind of build that process in as we go. So that's always good to have. But really, it's just communicating as you start the process of discovery, and what do I really want the site to accomplish? It's really more about that, and just making sure that you follow the normal process of just getting things put in order.
Is this a good time to talk about whether there needs to be any sort of integration with an ERP system or a e-commerce platform? And usually when we're talking about the nuts and bolts of the requirements, we'd want to know if there's going to be a Shopify component or another e-commerce add-on to the brochureware side of the site. What other business transactions need to be accommodated?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, we'd probably be discussing that during the discovery part of it, but it's really critical that you think about that up front, because adding it on at the end is kind of more difficult. Like all of a sudden you say, oh, I want to add WooCommerce and do, transactions on my website, or I want to be able to add PayPal, or, whatever it is. Those things are always good to have on the checklist.
Yeah, and then we get into what's not just nuts and bolts, but absolutely required, and that would be mandatory and compliance programming elements. So that includes the GDPR cookie consent, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and ADA, which stands for Americans with Disabilities Association. Hal, do you want to talk a little bit to those elements?
Sure. GDPR is really it's Europe. I mean, basically, if you're selling anything in the UK or Europe or anywhere overseas in the European area,
you're targeting European customers. It's not just if you're currently selling it, if you intend to.
It's just to make sure that the cookie consent is really just part of it. It's really about how much data do you collect and what is done with that data when you're collecting it. Are you using it? How are you using it? Even Google Analytics, you've got to say that in your privacy policy, and you've got to talk about where's the data going once we collect it and what's being done with it. So the cookie consent bar that you see on practically every website out there now, that's just a small part of it. And the California Consumer Act is really even a little more strict than the European part of it. Someone just asked, could I elaborate more on e-commerce? We'll get into that in just a second. But the California Act, depending upon what kind of data you're collecting, I know, Karen, and you might speak to that. You had to, Moxie had to redesign a website based on that particular problem.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and I'm sorry, I was reading the question, but you're talking about ADA compliance now, Hal?
California Consumer Privacy Act is.
Moxie had to redesign the for a client because of ADA compliance issues. And it wasn't a site that we had designed in the first place, but you know, whether it's GDPR or CCPA or ADA, got acronym soup here. Unfortunately, the way the world works now is that there are watchdog groups and ambulance chaser type attorneys who are trolling websites for large and small brands. It doesn't even matter if you're a large company, and saying that they're representing the group, whatever group is intended to be protected by GDPR, CCPA, ADA, but really looking to shake down a company almost through bribes. So with actually more than one of our clients have come to us saying we were contacted by an attorney who says that our website isn't, you know, ADA compliant, CCPA compliant, and they're looking for a settlement. They're going to sue. And so at least one of our clients, and I'm not going to name names, had to pay a $50,000 settlement and then redesign their website on top of that. So it cost them more than 100 grand to redesign their website under a timeline that wasn't of their own choosing. So it's not a small matter when we're saying to pay attention to these compliance, and we don't mean to scare you, but we do want to make sure that so many of our clients don't even realize that these compliance laws exist, or what the implications are. So, and it's not as if these compliance laws are difficult to program for. They're not. They're not at all. And in fact, ADA compliance can almost always be achieved through good search engine optimization programming techniques. So they go, a lot of the techniques go hand in hand, but it's important to realize that GDPR, CCPA, and ADA compliance exists, and to choose a web development partner who is well versed in how to make sure that your new site will be compliant in the end.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Could include things like, is there enough contrast between the font and the background? Does the font resize? Is it able to be, you know, can a screen reader easily read it? Do new tabs open in the same window or in a different window? And there are different levels of ADA compliance. There's A, AA, and AAA. And, you know, depending on if you're doing business with the government or whether you're just doing business in the private sector, your level of ADA compliance will change.
Yeah.
And I beat that dead horse enough, but you know, it's certainly something that probably could go on. We could go on and on and on about with the compliance matters in order to protect our clients from.
Yeah, we just got a chat from produce moms, so it's real. And again, we're not trying to scare you. We're just trying to make you aware of some of the things that you know need to think about. You know,
but that goes back into the budgeting as well, because when we're talking to our clients about helping them plan for their website redesign, we will educate them on what single A, double A, and AAA ADA compliance is, because if it needs to be AAA compliant, that's more programming. Mm-hmm. That's more complex.
It is.
Yeah. And it is an awareness thing too. It's not like, you know, brands go out and say, I want to make my site and I don't care about any compliance. It's that WordPress, you know, anyone can start a WordPress site, and there's not anything when you start a WordPress site that says, hey, make sure you're compliant for all of these things. So it's something that you do have to seek out the information on and partner with someone that has that unique skill set to be able to test and make sure that you're compliant.
Helen Beth, is this a good time to go back and answer the question from Pure Flavor about e-commerce adding on to an existing site versus launching a new site?
Sure. One of the things when you talk about e-commerce, even an existing site, you just want to make sure that you're tying it all together, look and feel, as well as, you know, how am I going to sell it, and who am I going to sell it? Am I going to take credit cards? Am I going to take, you know, there's a lot of issues with taking your own credit cards and storing data. You know, do you want to rely upon somebody like, you know, Stripe or, you know, some other way, PayPal, for instance, So there's just a lot, you can get into it very simple, where you just sell a product and they pay through PayPal and all's well, and you ship the product to them, right? But there's also a way that you've got to consider, well, how am I going to handle this on the back end? Who's going to box this, produce up, and am I going to get it to them? And, the amount of time it's going to take to not spoil, or, there's all kinds of issues that aren't just related to the website, but the things you have to consider if you're going to do e-commerce.
What are some of the most user-friendly e-commerce platforms? So we've seen a lot of our clients pivot during COVID and going direct to consumer with some of their sales. So if someone has an existing site and they want to get into direct to consumer, besides choosing a shipping partner and making sure that their box and everything has the correct liner to make sure that the produce arrives fresh inside. But what are some of the e-commerce, like programming related, from WooCommerce to Shopify to some of the others that are out there? Aren't most of them easy to tack on to an existing site?
Fairly easy. I would probably say, with WordPress, WooCommerce is obviously, usually everyone's first choice. But it is a little more complicated. So, sometimes the easiest way to go is, like you just said, Shopify is a completely separate, you set up a subdomain and it points to it, shop dot whatever your domain name is, and kind of unload all of your, I wouldn't say problems, but your buying capabilities are handled by somebody else, even though you have to have a Shopify, website, and that's another another website to maintain and handle. So it just depends on kind of the level of e-commerce you want to get into. But those are some of the easiest ones: WooCommerce, Shopify. There's a lot of options. PayPal. There's just a lot of options to be able to take money and sell product.
Great. I see a lot of comments popping up in the chat, and really appreciate everybody sharing their experience and sharing resources. So if you're not watching the chat, I encourage you to open up a separate window and take a look at what's been going on there. Beth, back to you. I've derailed your presentation enough.
Oh, this is our presentation. No, it's wherever we go is important. So just to get back to the info on the slide here, in addition to these compliance elements, you also want to consider what would be nice sort of wish list elements that are important to you. So do you want people signing up for your newsletter? Do you want them to be able to access your social media pages from the footer or the header? A contact form is important. Ability to download sales materials if that's of interest to you, and sharing videos. And then that Google Analytics plugin would be really important as well. So not to be too crazy about ADA, but we do have a whole slide on it. So just for information, and the civil penalties are incredibly high if your site is out of ADA compliance. So we looked right on the ADA website, and the fines can go all the way up to $75,000 for the first offense. So it's definitely not something to take lightly. But as Karen mentioned earlier, just filling in the common sections for SEO on the back end of WordPress are one of the easiest ways to make sure that you're doing that. So alt text and images. If you have a picture of a person at a computer, you want to just put person at computer in the alt text. So making sure that you're compliant for SEO and compliant for ADA really do go hand in hand. So it's pretty easy to keep those up to date.
And a lot of it goes back to that user manual and some of the things we talked about earlier too in the training, making sure that if somebody is loading, video and photos onto the website, that they're remembering to put in that alt text and captions and, whatever needs to be assigned to that. Because it's important that, like somebody said, oh, I love red text. So they put red on, pink or whatever it is. And the compliance is not there. You just have to be aware of that.
There are some other user preferences too, that if you're a fully sighted person and that you're analyzing your website's functionality based on your fully cited or, fully capable senses that make sense to you that don't make sense for a screen reader. So for example, we've had this debate back and forth at Moxie a lot. Most of us at Moxie, our preference is if you click a link in a website that's going to take you somewhere else, like off the site or to a different section, the preference would be for that to open up in a completely separate window, but to leave your main window where you're already navigating and looking, leave that open and have the next window open up in a separate tab. That is not ADA compliant. ADA compliant, like if you need to be fully ADA compliant up to the AAA level, you can't have new windows opening because the screen reader can't see that that's happened in the background. So you need to keep the user in the one window, even if it takes them off the site. Now you can decide that that doesn't fit with, like, you don't need to be AAA compliant, or that you prefer your mostly cited, users with all of their senses to have that new window user experience. That's a decision that needs to be made as part of the web development process. And there's no one right or wrong way. I mean, unless your site truly does need to be AAA compliant, and then you just have to stay in the same window. But those are the types of things that you would expect to have a discussion about, and that your web developer should be well informed of, and that we wouldn't want anyone to be surprised about later. Or if you're talking to leadership and leadership says, no, I don't like it when it opens up in the same window, I want it to open up in a new window, that you're well informed enough to say, right, I get you, but the reason why we've done it this way is because we've got this government contract that requires us to be AAA certified, and that means we have to keep everything opening in the same window and not open new windows.
One thing I'll mention, Beth, we had a question. If you're not going to have products basically at the same time that you're designing a website, how do you plan for that? Well, you really, and Karen, you probably have a lot of comments on this as well, but you really just talk about it with your agency or your developer or whoever is involved in your website. Just make sure that they're aware of it, even though you may not have the products yet. You probably want to kind of think about that. What is that product list, and do you will that fit into the existing structure?
Were you answering Brianna's question in the chat, Hal?
Yes.
All right, so beyond ADA, we're looking at SEO as well. And as we mentioned in the very beginning, this is not ranking for broccoli when in a search. This would mostly be for discovery. So if a retailer is, looking for your business specifically, they would type your business's name into Google, and we want to make sure that they can find you. Additionally, they may be searching your leadership, who may have similar names with lots of other people. And so we want to make sure that they are discoverable in a search, because if they go beyond, page 1 or page 2, people who are searching are going to give up. So that's really the point of search engine optimization as we're speaking about it, is we want to make sure that you're ranking for yourself and people are able to find your business. So a way that you can make sure to do that is by looking up the keywords that are going to be important to you. And generally those are location specific. So it would be something like, where can I find pineapple in Miami, Florida? So you'd want, pineapple, Miami, Florida to be one of the keywords that your business is trying to rank for. And these can change over time. So we recommend using some sort of software that can track it for you. And some of the good ones are SEMrush, Moz, and Manta. You also want to be ready to adapt, because Google is changing all of the time, and often they don't announce when they're doing it. So you want to be following websites and blogs and newsletters in addition to Google itself for when it publishes algorithm changes, so that you can be aware and ready to change the back end of your website. Optimization is really important. So we already talked about alt text in relation to ADA compliance, but things like meta tags, meta description, your target keywords, and the density of those keywords are going to be things that Google is looking for. And you can really consider this like another language that Google's algorithm speaks. So you want to make sure that everything you do is fitting within Google's search algorithm. And it is like a web across the internet that you're trying to just capture keywords so that people who are searching the internet can find you. And SEO is something that can take a while. So you don't want to assume that you'll see results overnight as soon as you put all the keywords into your website and make sure that all these little sections are optimized. It's something that compounds over time. So Google likes to reward good behavior, so to say. So if you're regularly updating on a regular content cadence, whether that be, weekly or monthly, you've made sure to fill in all of the little sections on the back end that Google wants you to do. If you do that enough over time, Google's going to start ranking you higher. So that's a process that can take, 3 to 6 and often 12 months. But that's something that we want to make sure is continually happening.
Somebody mentioned, Beth, how, when you say content, what kind of regular content updates would you suggest?
Yeah, I would suggest blog posts would be kind of the first and foremost tactic that you'd want to use toward SEO. So it can be, your field and farm updates. It could be an interview with your leadership, a team feature, pictures of your employees, recipes that you can do with your products, just anything that you can do to build sort of an ecosystem of content around your business. Each of those would make an excellent blog post. And that's what I mean by regular content. Karen or Hal, anything else you want to add on SEO?
Just going to kind of answer this chat. It says, how do you know what level of compliance you need to achieve? And that's a very tricky question. Not that I'm not trying to answer it, but it's really level A is like some users can access. Level AA is almost all users can access, and level AAA is that all, not almost all, but all users can access. And that's Karen put in a link there, and I've got another one that I'm gonna drop in there in a minute. But it's really based upon your business and who are you trying to reach. If you're B2B and you're selling to a distributor, it's probably not as important. You're probably going to want to be at least a level A, but not necessarily beyond that. Double A is going to be where people with readers, visual impaired, hearing impaired, can see your website through readers and be able to interact with your website is pretty much where I would say 80% of our clients need to be. Generally, if it's all users, it means you're. Go ahead.
If you're a major brand product at retail, your site should be at least AA compliant.
Yes. Now, if you're working with governments and things like that, county, state, federal, you probably are going to need to be in the AAA level somewhere. So
exactly. Someone asked about a good frequency to play well with Google.
Well, all the time, I would say. Yeah, I would say that as you're programming, when you create your site, you should definitely be considering Google as one of your audiences, if not primary audience. You want to make sure that everything is optimized when you start the site. And then in terms of putting new content on the site that we would assume would be optimized, weekly is a really good amount of time. So if you're posting blog posts, you want to make sure that you're doing those on the same general time and day of the week, every week. So if you do them Thursdays at 10 a.m., you want to make sure that you do them Thursdays at 10 a.m. consistently, because Google is going to learn, and you're training Google to come back to your site looking for new content. So you want to have something there ready for them.
And a lot of it could even be social media posting where you're driving people back to your website to learn more. So
yeah, exactly. I love this quote, data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay. So data is crucial. We want to make sure that people are, not only visiting your website and interacting with it, staying on it for a long time, but we want to make sure that we know what they're looking at, what pages they're most interacting with. And, that'll help us target where we want to do advertisements next, or what social networks are more worth it to post on than others that are driving the most traffic to your website. So voice search is a very good consideration. Voice search is huge. We're kind of seeing that it's expected that 55% of households are going to own a smart speaker by 2022. So Hey Alexa, Hey Siri is going to not be around for a while. It's not going anywhere. And because of that, we want to make sure that voice searches are tailored as such. So we want to make our keywords mirror the way people speak. So instead of saying, pineapple or pineapple Miami, Florida, we want to look for where can I find pineapple in Miami, Florida? Who has the best pineapple in Miami, Florida? Things that people would actually say to their voice speaker. And you want to make sure that your website is popping up within the first 3 search results for that visibility, which can be a huge challenge, but it will be helpful to implement those long tail keywords, which is what I mean by a full sentence as a keyword instead of just, a single word. And voice searches have tended to be location specific. So that's a really good opportunity to implement your Google My Business analytics, link it to your website, and then have your keywords match that so that you can capture the voice search behavior. Anything else on voice search, you guys?
Well, to remember that it's not just Alexa, that everyone's phone is a voice enabled, a voice search enabled device. So we're all using voice search. Well, I don't know, we all are. I hate typing on the keyboard and have gone straight to voice for almost everything I do on my mobile devices. So it's like Beth said, it's here now and it's not going away and it's beyond Alexa.
And it will continue to grow.
Yeah,
One
so
of
thinking
the
about
things
that.
that someone just asked in chat is that, we're talking about level of consumer engagement. Maybe this fits in here is, they're asking, is there a mechanism to collect audience data, for future targeting use? And I would say if you do all the things we're talking about in this kind of checklist, if you will, which will be downloadable on the website. But the idea is if you do all of this, you're going to be collecting data, whether it's Google Analytics or if it's, widgets you have on your website, like chat, online chat, where they can immediately reach you, or if there's, signing up for a newsletter where you're continually communicating with them, or if you have blog articles that allow comments and so on. I think it all kind of fits in that.
Yeah,
I
would
want to take Beth, and I don't know where it's going to fit into the conversation, to caution people about widgets, plugins, and other ways of do-it-yourself web development. I have a couple of horror stories. I'm going to share them as a way to say, make sure when you're vetting your web development freelancer, company, whatever, that they've really been doing this for a long time and really then know what they're doing. So Beth, let me know if now is a good time to talk about the cautions or if you want to wait until later in the presentation.
Yeah, we're running short on time. So if you want to touch on that now, I think that would be good.
Okay, so real quick then. So our best practices for Moxie's web development is to use as few plugins and widgets as possible, because they all tend to slow down the performance of the site and some of them counteract with one another. And so the older a site gets, the more plugins and widgets it uses, the more complicated it is to maintain the site and keep it functioning accurately and smoothly. So good web development, even if it's in a CMS platform like WordPress, is going to rely on as few plugins as you possibly can manage to get away with. And hell, I don't know what the magic number is, if it's 5 or 10 or what, but we've dealt with websites that we've taken over from a client and had to redesign that have had more than 20 different plugins and widgets, and nothing was working properly, and that's part of the reason why. And that's the thing, you can hire a freelancer off of guru.com who says they can do web development, and if they're developing a WordPress site using all plugins, they don't know what they're doing. So the other thing is do it yourself. So Moxie had a client who was a web technology company, and we built the site for them. Oh gosh, this is probably more than 10 years ago at this point, but it was a WordPress site. And the owner of the IT company, we asked him if he wanted ongoing maintenance, or if he wanted us to set up a backup system or anything. And he was like, no, my engineers can do that. We're going to handle it ourselves. Well, he found a WordPress plugin that would create an automatic backup, except he did the first sync of his website to an empty database, in effect wiping out his entire website. And there was no backup because he was creating the backup of his site with the plugin that he found. So we finished designing the site, and then about a month later, he wiped it out and we had to program it all over again. So be careful what you do with plugins. And always have a backup before you do an update of your plugins and whatnot. Okay.
Yeah.
Letting you move.
Yeah. So I think we actually need to wrap up now because we're about out of time. But just generally, the review process, we want to make sure that someone is looking at your website and going through a checklist of beta testing before you ever bring it live. And that's a crucial point, just to make sure that you're not missing anything. There's no misspelled words. Everything is working properly. So overall, I think that provides a really good overview of our website process. We do have a couple more slides that we didn't get to. So what I'm going to do is place in the chat a link that you are able to go onto our website and download this presentation, just so that you can review it afterward at your own leisure. Is there any questions that we did not get to in the chat box?
There's
one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was one about heat mapping, and I don't know if everybody understands what heat mapping is, but it's basically a visual of how people are going through your website. It's showing where their eyes are going and what they're clicking on and so on. I would definitely, if you're really wanting to get into heat mapping, that is not really as necessary as what I'd call an analytics program, whether that's Google Analytics or Adobe or, whatever kind of analytics you want to use. But you're going to find out you're probably going to get better and more accurate data by Google Analytics or an analytics program versus actual heat mapping. That's just, it's a great add-on. But again, that's adding another plugin probably to a WordPress website to do heat mapping. So probably wouldn't recommend it unless you're truly wanting to see if there's a problem with your website. Generally, they look at a website in an F pattern. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that, but you start on the left-hand side of a website, you go across the top, you come back, you go across the middle, and then you go down. That's generally what a heat map will show you.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for all of your questions and sharing information in the chat. This has been, we could go on and on, but as we said when we started, web development is a complicated mix of marketing messaging, technical, legal requirements, and it would have been difficult to get through all of that in an hour and cover it sufficiently. So please feel free to reach out to either me or Beth. And if you want to have an offline conversation to keep any of these topics going, we'd be happy to do that.
Definitely. Thank you so much, everyone. Your questions were very engaging and really made us think. So I hope that this information was helpful for you, at least to get a roadmap and some confidence in what you're doing when you start a new website project. So appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much.